Get started. Good evening, welcome, and thank you for joining us this evening for our conversations with CKG Angst film discussion. I'm Susan Lindsay, the Director of Programs with the Cameron K. Gallagher Foundation, and this is part of our Conversations with CKG discussion series, a community platform which seeks to turn the whispered, hidden conversations about mental health into open, supportive, educational dialogue. Thank you to Haley Dalton, who will be managing the chat and Q&A this evening. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see the raise your hand icon and then the Q&A icon. We ask that you use these to ask your questions. If you put your question in the chat and there's other conversation or comments going on in there, sometimes it's hard to realize there's a question in there. So if you can please use the raise your hand or the Q&A to ask your question. And we will do our best to get to as many questions as possible within the hour. A recording of tonight's conversation will be available on ckgconnections.com. If you have not had a chance to watch Angst yet, that's okay. I think that you will still find this conversation very valuable. The film link is available through tomorrow, July 22nd, and Haley will post that link in the chat so it's easily accessible for you. We are joined by licensed marriage and family therapist Ashley Morgan Soukup with Summit Emotional Health. Ashley works with children, adolescents, and adults specializing in post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma, marital concerns, anxiety, depression, ADHD, substance abuse, and behavioral concerns. Specifically, Ashley assists individuals and families in exploring new patterns of communication and relational engagement to support one another and promote long-lasting change within the family. So welcome, Ashley, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So the film Angst opens with a definition of anxiety, which is a feeling of worry or nervousness about something with an uncertain outcome. And then the statement that 100% of humans experience anxiety. So I really love that it starts this way because it immediately normalizes the experience of anxiety. So everyone here tonight, everyone we know, everyone we've ever come in contact with or will experiences anxiety. So let's start there. Ashley, why is validating the experience of anxiety so important?
Yes, so I want you guys to think about it for a second. Like, we have basic instincts in our body. Really kind of, we're in tune, our body and our mind are in tune to know that if something's going on that feels a little bit different with us, that there might be an issue or that we need to address or manage. So if we have a physical ailment, something's hurting, we go, oh gosh, this isn't right, I need to go to the doctor. If we have an emotional kind of, I'm feeling sad or I'm feeling worried, or I see somebody else cry or feel sad or look sad, I go, oh gosh, something's going on, right? My brain triggers something's going on with that person or something's going on with me. I'm having a hard time. And then we really focus in on address it. Well, if emotions are kind of more chronic, anxiety is more chronic, or we're feeling it a lot, we go, wow, this really could be a problem. In society, we really looked at an anxiety being in a negative feeling, right? It's like sadness, worry, fear, anger. It's negative. And there's a stigma to it, but really we're forgetting that it is a fleeting emotion, just like happiness, just like excitement, just like enthusiasm, just like joy, just like contentment. And then we have the negative ones I've just explained, or even apathy, that kind of stuff. They're all fleeting, they come and go, and anxiety also can come and go. And when we don't normalize it or don't validate people's experiences with anxiety, just like we would with happiness, joy, anger, frustration, we're giving it a lot of power, and that power can bring about fear. So if we say, hey, I'm anxious, and we go, oh my gosh, what's wrong with you? All the time, there's something wrong with you. It puts into perspective, maybe there is something wrong with me and this is a problem and I'm not going to talk about it as much, and there becomes fear, shame, guilt. Or, hey, I'm anxious. Okay, what's happening for you? What are you experiencing? That's all right. How can I support you in that? That's a more positive experience. It takes the fear away and then gives people an opportunity to really talk about it.
I like that. And because really, like, we talk about positive and negative emotions, but they're neither. They just are, right? They're just the emotion that we can observe and maybe learn from why we're experiencing it. But emotions aren't positive or negative, right?
They're not positive or negative. And actually, anxiety really can bring about a positive experience for people. If I don't have any anxiety about anything, say I'm going to go swimming, we're doing swim team right now, and I have zero anxiety or zero nerve, I'm going to get on the block and I'm going to swim, and I might swim pretty slow. I don't really like, I'm not nervous. I'm not caring about my performance. I'm not wanting to do better. So I have zero motivation to take action. Or if I have a little bit of anxiety, that little bit of butterflies, that adrenaline kind of gets created in me, that amygdala gets kind of highlighted. Oh my gosh, like I got to do something. It promotes this like action and motivation and drive to do better and to challenge me to persevere and overcome the situation that I'm dealing with. And then I get out of the pool and I go, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. That was awesome. I'm so proud of myself. But if we have so much anxiety and we're plagued by it, we don't take action. So we call it an anxiety performance curve. I need just the right amount of anxiety to take action and conquer my fear and overcome the situation or the stressor. But if I have too much, it can be debilitating.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. Thanks. I like that curve. It's true. It's like you want to be right at that sweet spot where it's really motivating and you can make things happen with it. So we would love to hear from our participants, from our audience tonight, your takeaways from the film. What resonated with you? If there's one takeaway that you would share with a friend, what would that be? And you can raise your hand and Haley can unmute you and you can ask your question or comment or share what you thought of the film, or you can type it in the Q&A.
If there are any kids that watch this too with their parents, I'd love to hear from you because I think it gives a cool adolescent perspective in the video. And I'd love to see how you guys resonated with that.
Skip, I think you're unmuted.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. So my favorite takeaway was towards the end of the movie, and I don't remember the gentleman who was talking, but he was just talking about how, you can rewire your brain and how you can learn, just a set of skills like any set of skills. You can, I think the quote was positivity. You can rewire your brain to go to positivity instead of, going to anxiety. And I think that's true from my experience as well, that you can definitely learn a set of skills that you can practice just like anything else to get better at going in one direction instead of another. So that was my favorite takeaway.
Yes, I think it's a good testament that our brain, it's always having neurons. And unlike our bodies, once we hit a certain age to stop growing, our brain's always growing and evolving and creating like these neural pathways that really get rewired all the time. And we call it a negative tape. So if I have a negative anxiety tape and I keep playing it over and over to a negative space, that's my pattern. I can learn to stop it. It doesn't mean it's going to always not be there, right? I can't go down that pathway, but I can say, hey, I'm going to stop this thought. I'm going to challenge it and I'm going to create a new pathway that gives a more positive mindset. And that can start with some of these tips that they talked about, like doing the ice cubes or the tapping. I'm going to distract my mind enough to be able to go to from the pathway that I'm experiencing and channel something else and come up with a different scenario or a different challenge myself to think about this differently. And that's progress. Like people can change. And I really believe they know how to change or how to have a different tape more often than not, they really want to.
Yeah, thanks, Skip. Anyone else? Would anyone else like to share what their biggest takeaway from the film was?
I'll share a couple of things. Haley, was anybody responding? Did anybody have?
Not yet, but everyone feel free to raise your hands.
Yes, two things really stuck out to me in the video. And of course, I'm thinking less about the content and more about the process with these kids that we're presenting, is their level of humility and openness to talk about their anxiety. Like if you think about that, it's how to manage worry and nervousness about an uncertain outcome. Well, they just put their feelings, which are completely vulnerable, out for the entire world to see. And as an adult, that is anxiety provoking for me to think about doing, much less a teenager who struggles with anxiety. And like, what an ability for them to be able to conquer a fear or conquer some like stress and recognize like, wow, like I can like create a narrative about my anxiety that's going to help people and like support them. And it really gives them a sense of purpose. Like that was really exciting to watch. And the other thing was that the parents' acknowledgement of their ability to understand their role in their kids' anxiety. And we'll talk about that some later today, but that they have a role in a relationship with their own anxiety, and that can be put on their kids. And then also, how do they support their children through their own anxiety journey? And that, that looked different for different parents and different kids. And it was nice for me to see, I think there's a father daughter duo, and him being able to say, her being able to say, like, I can imagine that was really hard for you, and him saying, yes, it was really hard, but I'm also very proud of you and how far you've come. And like, that was just a cool experience to see. They both had a different experience with the same situation, but they were able to support each other.
Yes, the first time that I watched Angst, which was probably about 3 years ago, that father-daughter pair stood out to me the most. I think it's very impactful to hear both of their perspectives and how they can see each other's perspective at this point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the flip side of that is we would love to hear if there was any part of the film that you felt in conflict with or that just didn't resonate with you. Anyone? There, I have to say, for me, I really thought about it, and I can't think of anything that, didn't really resonate. Even the ones that, the teens describing their experiences that maybe I personally don't relate to, like the OCD and the girl who washes her hands, and uses tons of soap and was describing that experience. Like, I don't relate to it, but I could empathize with it. And I especially thought, like, after this past year of COVID and quarantine, especially the beginning of quarantine when we didn't know what was going on. And, I feel like I can much more relate to someone who has that fear than I probably could have before.
Definitely. Me too. I didn't have anything that I was in conflict with or didn't resonate, but I will take a couple minutes to talk about, take a moment, like when they were putting in the tips and tricks at the end, just being mindful that everybody's different, and some things that will work for some people, they won't work for others. And I often describe it in the session of like, I can give you skills, I can give you tips and tricks and strategies, but sometimes it might feel like we're throwing a dart at the wall. Like, holding ice for one person is not going to be the same for another. Much like, they describe there's anticipatory anxiety, like I'm anticipating worry about things that haven't even happened yet, where some people might say, hey, I need to distract myself and not think about that thought to stop it. Where other people not thinking about it would create and distracting yourself from it would create even more anxiety because like it's not here. So maybe creating a concrete plan, thinking it through, processing, talking about, hey, what am I going to do if this situation does arise, might be beneficial for another person. If that makes any sense, like really like narrowing down, what is your anxiety? What are you feeling? What's happening for you in that moment? And then what really works for you? And really hoping that person trusts you enough to say like, that's not going to work. I don't like that. I don't agree with that. That's not going to work. And really hearing them in that.
Yeah, it's true. Everybody is different. Everybody's anxiety, how they experience it is different. And so what's going to work is also going to be different.
The other thing too is avoidance is not the same thing as distraction. So when we are in, they talked avoidance in the video and that being an issue, but they also were talking about distraction techniques at the end. And, like going to get a drink of water or taking a break or reading a book. Well, you can read a book for 30 seconds or so, or 30 minutes or so and distract yourself. And that's a great tool. But if every time we face something, we say, hey, I'm scared to go to school, and we go and read our book or go to our room and never go to school, that's avoidance. And that's where it's a problem. Like you can distract yourself from the anxiety when it's like ever present and kind of feeling like it's sitting on your chest. But then what are you going to do when you have to face it to kind of achieve your daily activity or function in the world? So that's different.
Yeah, thanks for differentiating. I'm going to jump to our question on avoidance since we're talking about it. So the film talks about how detrimental avoidance behaviors can be as a response to anxiety. And sometimes avoidance is obvious, like the example you just gave, Ashley, where it's like you're not going to school. That's clear. You're avoiding school. Or in the film, the boy who didn't want to walk into class late and sit in a seat that he was uncomfortable in. And so he sat down and then he got up and left and went home. Like that's very clear avoidance. But what are some other not so obvious avoidance behaviors to watch for?
Yes. Spending more time in one's room, spending more time on like a phone, a TV, and electronics. And that one I want to give a caveat to, like, you know, we could be doing that because we're ruminating in the thought, right? If I'm so anxious that I don't look like everybody else, and then I'm going to sit on the phone and compare myself to what everybody else looks like, that's one thing. But also, if I like don't want to go out into the world, or I don't want to go to school, or I'm scared to do my homework because I'm afraid I'm going to fail at school and I'm bad at it, instead of acknowledging why I feel bad at school and I'm anxious about kind of academics, I'm sitting on my phone or playing video games or watching TV. That's avoidance. And also ones of like total meltdown or constant anger or irritability could be like another mechanism for avoidance. Like if it's homework time and homework's really hard, or I am, you know, scared I can't get my assignment done, or I'm anxious because I don't know how to start the assignment, and I like have a complete fit and meltdown and pick a fight with my mom and explode, that I'm avoiding it, but it's looking like an externalizing behavior rather than just kind of being mild-mannered and avoiding something. Also just focusing attention on things that don't matter, and your mind racing and ruminating on things that, like, you know, I'm working on planning a big old party and what my birthday is going to look like and addressing that rather than acknowledging the issue that I'm really anxious about that's present. That's another one. Also high need for control. I'm sorry, I got time. Taking a high need for control in other areas of your life. Like I'm going to focus on, and one of the girls talked about this, like cheer was very anxiety for provoking for her, and that was stressful, and she didn't feel like she was in control in that situation, so she controlled what she ate or what she didn't eat. So high needs for control is another example of avoidance.
So is self-harm an example of avoidance?
I think that self-harm would be more of a way of releasing the emotion. Like if I'm intentionally not, I have a hard time talking about my anxiety or my worries, or I can't even sometimes pinpoint it. I just feel really bad and I can't make sense of that or explain why. I might self-harm as a mechanism to release the feeling or release the emotion from my body. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was thinking maybe it was like, I don't want to deal with that emotion, so it gives me something else to like focus on and feel other than that emotion.
Yeah, it could be. And I think sometimes people who self-harm, it doesn't resonate that they want to feel something. Or sometimes people say, hey, I'm avoiding the conversation because I don't know how to do that. And it's anxiety provoking to tell somebody what's going on or how I'm feeling or that something is wrong. So I'll self-harm, and it's not like it's attention seeking behavior, but like I'm hurting and I need people to know that like this is very much like physical and emotional and like psychological for me.
Okay, thanks. So is anxiety on the rise, or are we just more aware of it?
Okay, so that's a really good question. There's an NIH study that was done, and this one was with adults, and it looked at a longitudinal study on anxiety from 2008 to 2018. And it said, let me pull I did not remember. Oh, here it is. From 2008 to 2018, an increase from 5.12% to 6.68%. So the anxiety roulette increased marginally. But what was interesting, in the ages of 18 to 25, so that transition age youth age, it was 7.97%, so almost 8% in 2008 to 14.66% in 2018. So I'd be curious if we looked into it, like what really changed. Well, 2008 was the inception of the iPhone. And that would be the youth that was kind of interacting during the iPhone stage, right? And also I've seen studies and data that from 2008 on, it's a marginal increase, but I think we don't know, correlation does not always like imply causation. So if something's on the rise, do we know like it's on the rise because anxiety is higher, or what else is really going on to cause it? And could it be like we talk more about it? It's still stigmatizing, but much less so than it was, 10, 15 years ago. I think people are more aware of the feeling of anxiety. Like more often, when I was in, high school, middle school, it'd be, I'm really stressed out, or I'm scared, or I'm worried, or I'm overwhelmed. Like you would use that terminology more rather than like, I'm anxious. People just didn't have that verbiage. And now that we have, I think people are like, I'm anxious all the time. And that can bring about a little bit of a problem too. Like, does anxiety imply that there's an anxiety disorder. And that's something that I think we could talk about today too. Skip asked for me to repeat the percent increase in 1825. So it's 7.97% in 2008 to 14.66% in 2018. And that study was done by the NIH.
One of the teens in the film says that her parents tell her, you don't have anxiety, you're just anxious. And so I think there's a couple of things to unpack in that statement. First, can you speak to how that can be perceived as minimizing the experience of someone with anxiety? And then second, is there a difference between having anxiety and just being anxious?
So I think first things first, is a kid is telling you that they have anxiety or they're anxious, they are opening up to you about their feeling. And like, I think that we need to validate their emotion regardless of whether we want to diagnose it as a disorder or not. Like if my kid saying like, I have anxiety, I'm say, okay, well, what anxiety about what? Or what's happening to cause it? Not, hey, you're anxious, you're just anxious. And we got to be mindful of the verbiage, right? Like argue semantics here, just. Like that means it's minimal. It's not that big of a deal. And I think what's really happening here is it's fear, right? If I heard my kid had anxiety or my kid was depressed or my kid was had a learning disorder or my kid, whatever was going on for them, right? Like it would make me scared. I'd be worried about them. I would be concerned about their health. I would want to be watching out for them. I'd be scared. So that being said, when people say, oh, you don't have anxiety, well, you're just anxious. Well, are we trying to minimize it and make it better because that makes our fear go away? Like that makes us less scared. And then the other piece is, people, because it is still stigmatizing and oh, your kid has anxiety. Like, what did I do wrong as a parent? Did I make a mistake? Did I screw up? Did I screw up? Did I mess them? Did I harm them in some way? And there's a lot of guilt and shame. And then also worry that we're going to be judged by our counterparts. We would be judged by their parents. Like if our kids walking around saying, hey, I have anxiety, oh man, are people going to hear that? And they're going to think something's wrong with them. Does that make sense?
Yes,
but
there's a lot. We're going to, I don't want to jump ahead because I have a follow-up question to this, but we are going to get to that parent fear and parent anxiety in a minute. But before that, I want to ask, how do I know if my child or, my teen or a teen in my life, doesn't have to be, you have to be a parent to recognize that someone may be struggling. How do I know if they have anxiety?
Yes. So, and I realized I didn't answer the second half of your question of, if I'm just anxious or I'm anxiety, they're the exact same thing. It's like semantics, right? Like if you have anxiety, you have anxiety. Where we know, is it a problem, right? Anxiety is normal. Does it impede my daily life? Does it impede my ability to perform in activities or the way that I want to? And that's when we know it's an issue. So if it's harming this child to the point, and they're anxious all the time to the point that it keeps them from performing a task to the effort that or the level that they feel like they should perform, or it impedes their ability to engage with other people socially in a way that they feel like they should be engaging. And the should is their perspective, not our perspective, like as a parent, like how they want to perform, how they want to engage with the world. Like, is it a problem for them? And if it's a problem for them and it gets in the way of them being able to engage in the world in a healthy way, that's where it could be an anxiety disorder. Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
One of the psychologists in the video really explained it well of like, I want to act, I want to do well, I want to get into a place where I can perform and I just can't. It's almost like you hit the wall, like there's a roadblock there and you try and you know what you should do and you just physically cannot do it. That's an anxiety disorder.
So how should parents or loved ones, grandparents, those in a teen's life, how should they respond?
Mm-hmm. I think that you respond with lots of empathy and nurturing. You validate their experience and what's going on. I think, and you encourage them that they can do it. I think like praising them for breathing is what I say often of like, you are so good at X, Y, and Z, and you are capable in all these different ways. And I know that you're really scared right now, and this is really hard, but we believe in you and we will walk you through this and you can do it. And sometimes it's really about putting firm but flexible boundaries in, like you have to go to school. Like that's not the option. Like you have to push through and you have to overcome your fears, but we will be there to support you along the way. And that might look like I'm holding your hand and walking you through it. I'm giving you all the tips and tricks. I'm going to call and check in on you 3 times a day until you don't need it any longer. You're going to get as many breaks in classroom as you can, and really putting in things and like crutches along the way to get them to a place that they can achieve, what they want to and conquer their fear.
How it seems like it's so hard as a parent to know when you're being supportive and when maybe you're coddling a little. Like, where is that line? How do you figure out, like, is calling 3 times a day excessive or is that helpful? Like, where's that line?
When I think it's taking a true gauge on like, what are they needing in the moment? Like if they aren't like, and I always say, like, okay, if they're not going to school, right? Or they can't go into a restaurant and have a conversation and order, right? Am I truly harming them if I make them do it? No. But if they truly can't go to school and they can't walk in the door, my job is to teach them how to be able to do that. Would I harm them if I let them call me 3 times a day? Also, no. So like being mindful of like, what is the detriment to like coddling them a little bit? And does it outweigh the consequences of not doing what they're supposed to? Like if they don't go to school forever and they never conquer that fear, we're going to be in a heap of trouble. Whereas if they go to school and they have to call me a couple times a day to like get through the school day, like long-term, they're not going to be calling me when they're in college. Like, and more often than not, I find with kids, if you give them the flexibility and the leeway to have a little bit of a crutch and show nurturing and support, they're going to use it a little bit and then they're going to conquer their fear and be able to get to where they need to go. And they're not going to use it anymore. Like I'll say, let them call home at morning snack and for little kids, morning snack and at lunchtime, and they can call in the afternoon they want for 2 weeks. We're putting the implementation of the plan in place 2 weeks. By day 4, they're not calling home. They're like, good, they got this. But we give them the crutch and then we give them a little bit of power and control that they can achieve it.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Thanks. So let's talk about how anxiety we experience as parents affects our reactions and decisions. So this was one of my biggest takeaways from the film the first time I watched it. Mm-hmm. It really made me stop and think about when, why, and how I parent from a place of fear. And for me, I will say I think it's generally a fear of my child getting hurt or a fear of what others are thinking about my parenting. Mm-hmm. So the fear of being judged by others. So can you share tips for how parents can become more aware of when they're parenting out of fear or out of anxiety? Because I think that like a lot of times it's just so instinctual. It's just like the gut reaction. We're not thinking about it. It's just happening. So how we can kind of like take a step back and be aware of when that's happening for us and how we can shift to a more thoughtful response in parenting.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to ask you guys to do something for me, and we're going to kind of highlight that level of fear for a second. So I want you to think about a time with your kids where you feel like that you got really stressed out or really anxious or really scared. It could be anything. Now I want you to imagine, like, what did your body feel like in that moment? Were you super tense? Did you start sweating? Did your stomach kind of feel like you were going to throw up? Did you feel like you want to run away? Did you get kind of antsy? What is your feelings now? Is it, hey, I'm really scared. Hey, I'm worried. Hey, somebody's going to judge me. Oh my gosh, how could they ever even do that? Are they crazy? Right? And then I want, now that you think about it, like what then was your reaction with your child when you had this response? Did you scream and yell? Did you burst into tears? Did you walk away and put your head in your phone and not engage at all? Did you say, hey, you got to go see mom or dad because I cannot deal with you right now? Like, what did you do and what was your reaction? That reaction is your fear response. Because when we are like super scared or we're anxious or we're stressed, our amygdala is our like fight or flight response in our brain, and it gets highlighted. the frontal lobe in our brain like totally shuts down. Like we get highlighted in our amygdala, it slows down our frontal lobe, which is our decision-making center, our ability to like manage our impulse control. And that we are either fighters or we're flighters. And our reactivity to anxiety is directly related to how we parent when we're scared. Like if my kid acts out and I go, oh my gosh, like they're going to think you're a terrible kid, right? Like, I can't believe you did that. And I get scared. I'm going to scream and yell at them and say, what were you thinking? You need to go to your room, rather than like, what was happening that you would do that? Like, that's totally not like you. When I calm down, I can say what was happening for them. That's totally not like them. But when I'm that fight or flight response, my frontal lobe, my like ability to think clearly is like out of control. So like, first of all, in terms of tips and tricks, you got to really recognize like, what is your defensive reaction when you are scared? What do you do? And then be very in tune to it. And then intentionally try to slow down that amygdala. And they talked about this in the video. One of the ways to do that is where distraction can be really important. Like if I intentionally snap my fingers, left, right. If I go and take 5 minutes and read a book, if I get up and walk around the house and grab a drink of water, if I go into the bathroom and shut myself off from whatever's going on in the moment and take a deep breath and like really think things through and focus on my breathing, I'm then focusing on what I'm doing tactile wise or physically. And I'm like kind of basically like the amygdala is no longer highlighted. I'm decreasing the focus and the emphasis on the anxiety, and my fear response is going to go away. And then I can think through the process rationally and come up with a rational, like coherent answer to my child when they're having a hard time or they're anxious about something.
So sticking on the parent piece, though, one of the parts that I really liked in the film is when the therapist is speaking about asking the teen client, who's been diagnosed with anxiety, which parent has it, and the teen being able always to be like, that one. And, I like it because it's so true. It's so honest. And my husband and I watched the film together the first time, and then we had some great conversations about which one of us we felt like would, they would point to, although we said both, but, again, everybody experiences anxiety. So I was just tickled by that part in the film. So how much of anxiety in our kids is genetic?
So they're 50% part of each of the parent, right? So then there's like a 50-50 shot if they're going to be anxious or not, based on whatever's going on with their genetics, right? And then are they anxious, or they have a predisposition to be anxious because of a parent? Then there's environmental factors or stressors that could also impact the anxiety and cause them to be anxious. So I don't know like how, like percentage wise, what the likelihood of them being anxious is. I think it depends on a variety of different things. But I will say that in my office, when somebody's chronically anxious and like it's very much like an organic based anxiety, I could say, who else in your family has anxiety? And they're going to say somebody. And it's really funny that they might say mom and dad aren't anxious, but grandma or grandpa, or I have an uncle or I have an aunt that's anxious. And then I kind of smirk to myself of like, if everybody else in the anxiety like is anxious and mom and dad aren't, or saying that they're not, are they just not aware of it? Like, I mean, the fair response in a therapy session of who has anxiety, it would be, we all do.
Right.
Like, and I think as a therapist, instead of saying like, who else in the family has anxiety, it would be a better question to say, what happens in your family when somebody experiences anxiety? What does that look like for them? And then we can have more of an understanding, because it is learned behavior. Like we learn how to model our actions and our reactions based upon our parents and how we're being raised.
Right. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think the other reason I was so tickled was because when she was like, who has a really clean house? I was like, oh, that was my childhood. We had an exceptionally clean house. And, I look back now, and because of course the word anxiety wasn't even in my vocabulary, as a kid, but I look back now and I'm like,
man, that was what was going on Saturday morning.
Yeah. Exactly. Let's see. I feel like we've talked about that a little bit. So let's talk about ourselves. So whether we're adults or teens, How can we manage our daily stress and anxiety, since we know we all experience it, and what kind of tools and tips you can share with us?
So the video had a ton of really good tips and tricks at the end in regards to using the ice cubes, doing like we were talking about the left, right kind of tactile snapping. One was even counting. I'm going to count the bricks on the wall, or listen to the clock. I'm going to count the bricks as I'm walking up to a school. I'm going to look at the trees as they go by. That kind of stuff can be very helpful for in the moment anxiety. Journaling is a really effective way to manage your anxiety, because basically what we're doing is we're getting out of our head, we're getting out of our heart, and we're putting on paper and we're giving it to something. And I often say to kids, like, give it space. Like, you're trying to avoid an emotion because it feels yucky. Well, we wouldn't avoid happiness. We wouldn't avoid joy. Like, if you're angry, like, you react. Like, we're not avoiding it. Like, let's give it some space and give it some room. And if you write it down on a piece of paper, we're giving it about 15 minutes, set a timer, 15 minutes to journal, write about it, close the book, and then you move on. So that's a great tip. Another way to manage is exercise and like physical, kind of physical engagement. It increases endorphins and increases serotonin levels. And then that ultimately will decrease anxiety and kind of help. And it also serves as a great source of distraction. And then routine and structure. Often when we feel out of control, right, that's when anxiety can set in. So focusing on establishing a consistent routine and a consistent, structure to your day can be really helpful. And flank it on, I always say the bookends, like focus on those, like try to get up and do the same thing first time every morning, try to go to bed and kind of do the same kind of bedtime ritual and routine at night. And then in the middle, you can wiggle room a little bit, but, focus on having a couple activities and really distract yourself and engage with the world. I often heard DBT, which is dialectical behavioral therapy. There's a piece and component that talks about anxiety, kind of happening when you worry about the past and have regrets and things about the past. And then you're constantly focusing and worrying about things that happen in the future. So if you can really take time to like focus on the present, have some gratitude, acknowledge what's going on in the world around you that's positive and good, that could also prove to really manage your anxiety.
I heard once that depression is focusing on what has happened in the past, and anxiety is focusing on what has not happened yet in the future.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's where it comes from.
Yes.
DBT, I didn't know. But I liked that definition because it's so simple and so clear, and it really resonated with me.
Absolutely.
When I heard it.
And I forgot a good one. I don't know why I forgot this one, because this is what I do all day long, is we forgot to say talk to people. And that was a big piece to the video. And ultimately, maybe I'm a detriment to my professional job, but like, it's not rocket science to be a therapist, right? Like, there's been multiple research saying like, yes, we have skills. Yes, that we have certain like evidence-based approaches that we can do, but overwhelmingly above and beyond any of evidence-based approach, it's the therapeutic relationship and the engagement with the person, that they're trusting, that you can validate them, you hear them and listen and support them and what they're experiencing, and like have a conversation about what's going on. And that's proven most effective in a therapeutic setting. Well, parents can do that with their kids. Parents can have that with each other in terms of as a couple, and parents can have that with like the world and their friends and relationships. Like, you just have a positive, trusting relationship with people and talk to them.
We can all do that. Well, it brings me to, at the end of the film, many of the teens and Michael Phelps speak to the importance of community connection and relationships in their lives and managing their anxiety. And one of the teens even says, I should have written down exactly what I said, but it was like, I feel loved, and I love, it was something about feeling loved through, the people in his life. And so can we talk about that a little bit? Like, how do we build that support and community, or help our teens build that support and community for themselves? And I also think about like learning that as a teen, so that when you go off to college or into the military or into the workforce and you're moving out of your parents' house and you have to build that for yourself somewhat, depending on how far away you go, it's starting over. It's starting a new part of your life.
I had a parent at one time, they had older children, and they said the kids came back and they were all sitting down talking about things and like what they appreciated about their childhood and like what they appreciated about the relationship with their parent. And it was a male, the adult male said, Mom, like, I think the best thing, like, we made mistakes and you got mad and you punished us, but you never judged us. Like, you met us where we were. You never had judgment. And I think if we can, like, whether it's with parents or with peers or as we go into the world and we have adult relationships, like, really be careful on curating the relationships that you have with people. Like, if you find that you're interacting into a peer group or friends or social situation and you're always walking back second guessing or like anxious about it, it might be less about you having anxiety and more about how you're experiencing that group and what's going on with them. Like, if I walk in and like I have 4, 5, 6 girlfriends who every time I go see them and every time we have conversations and they ask how I am and they're really curious about my family life and they talk to me and like I hear them and they share with me, that's a key too. They're modeling and sharing with me things and I walk out and feel great. And then the very next weekend I go and hang out with a different friend group or a different group of people and we're having a good time. It seems fun, but I leave and I'm second guessing myself or second guessing the interactions or I'm just not feeling right and I'm anxious. It might be that it just wasn't a good fit. And it doesn't mean it's bad people. They're not bad people. It's just you guys don't fit and you don't resonate. And that's okay. Like, we're not meant to like, be friends with everyone and be liked by everybody. As much as I would like to be liked by everybody,
No, it's a great point. And I think that comes with age and perspective. But as a teen, you do kind of feel like, or at least I, as a teen, definitely felt like everybody should be my friend, or why am I not fitting into this group? Or, I didn't have that perspective. I just had a conversation with someone the other day about, I have reached a point in my life where I feel like I have completely accepted that I am an introvert, that I am okay with like a small group of really close friends. And I've never been a group person. Like, I didn't join a sorority in college. That's just not my personality. And it's kind of the cultural expectation, I think. And so it's taken a long time to be like, well, that's just not me. And I'm perfectly happy over here, like with my few close relationships. And that works for me. And that's okay.
When I thank you so much for sharing that because it's such a good point. I think, as we end up, middle school on, it's like, hey, like the popular kids are the ones that are hanging out with everyone, sitting at the biggest lunch table with everybody there. Everybody invites them to their birthday parties. They're doing all the different sports. Like, they're engaged all the time. And like, that is really good for some people. And they are extroverted and high energy and like engaged in that experience. And that's awesome. But there's a lot of people that aren't like that. And if we force them into that and this expectation that they're going to be popular because they, that's what the kind of the cultural kind of idea is. And then they do that, they end up feeling worse about themselves. And then oftentimes might engage in behaviors that's like the groupthink mentality and pressures to like conform to the popularity in the group. And then that's really not like them. And then they start beating themselves up and we see confidence issues. Or if we can just embrace everybody that you are who you are and we love everybody for what they are and what they do and their interests and we accept them, like that goes a long way in kind of building confidence and then decreasing anxiety. I can be who I want to be and that's okay.
Yeah, I think it's really important for teens to feel like there are a wide variety of options and, how you have relationships with other people and what fits for you and what works.
Mm-hmm. When you naming it too, and Susan, I want to share this with the parent on the parents are participants of you acknowledging that and saying, you know what, like in modeling, like, I maybe thought I should be part of the group. And then I realized in college, like that wasn't me and I was okay with that. And I'm kind of cool. And now I realize I really like a smaller group of people and that's okay. That was a very like eloquent and like healthy way that you could also have a conversation with your kid of like, this is kind of how I experienced the world. And this is like, it was okay for me. And yeah, it could have been hard. But if this is like how you are, like, it's okay too. Like, and that's all right. And you can be whoever you want to be. And I've gone through that. And I get it. I know it might be difficult, but like, also like, I'm here for you to listen if that's something you're going through, and just be what you want to be, bud. Like, you know, so it's a cool way to model.
Yeah, thanks. I feel like we've really kind of covered most of my questions. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you want to be sure to talk about?
Oh, one of them is the top three things we should look for in anxiety, and like, how should we respond? And I just answered this question. I think you've asked it in one way, but I answered it differently when we were going through our questions earlier. I really want to be mindful of, like, if we're not sure a kid's struggling with something or having anxiety, like, look at the nuances of their behaviors. Like, if they are one that typically is introverted and they're staying in a lot, and all of a sudden they're going out all the time, like, there might be something going on that we need to talk about. It could not be anxiety. It could be depression. It could be, you know, they just kind of found themselves, right? But it could be a marked change in behavior, could be something. If they were drawing more and they tend to be extroverted, that's a concern. If they used to take care of their appearance and then now they're not, that could be a concern. If they're chronically irritable or kind of more impulsive or frustrated when typically they were even keeled, that could be a big concern that they're anxious. If they're very distracted, like kind of all the time, like people will come in and say, like, I think my kid has ADHD. Like, they can't like follow anything I say. I'm like, they're not ADHD. They're really anxious and they're worried about things, and their brain's like tuned into that and not focused on what they're supposed to be doing. Those are concerns. Increase in risky behavior. So if you are seeing some self-harm kind of behavior, drinking, engagement, like kind of trying drugs, curiosity about drinking, vaping, and doing drugs, that could be a concern for, hey, I'm anxious, because we were high likelihood of self-medicating with anxiety. If we're doing things that are so totally out of the blue, out of character, like I all of a sudden just skip school, that could be a concern. Like, kids don't just act bad for no reason, right? They don't make negative behaviors or choices for no reason. It's what's happening to them, and we really need to address it in more of an empathetic way rather than just punishing them. And then also continual talk of stress, worry, feeling overwhelmed. Like, I will hear that more often than not, particularly in teenage girls. I'm just really stressed. Like, I'm really overwhelmed. I'm like, okay, like, tell me more about that. And then like, you kind of find out, like, they're in their head all the time, worrying about everything all the time. And you're like, hey, dude, that's actually anxiety. And like, that's fixable. Like, let's figure out how to fix it and manage it. That kind of thing.
Awesome. Do any of our participants have any comments or questions, anything we haven't covered that you are wondering about, either specifically about the film or anxiety in general? I do have one last question that I'm going to ask. And I know this is a hard one to answer maybe, but if someone is diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, will they always have it?
No, because I think people are capable of change, and I think that people want to do well if they can. And if they take the tips and tricks and work on it and kind of work on kind of changing their brain tape and managing it, like, they won't have it. I think if you are diagnosed with an anxiety disorder and you do the work on it and you're motivated to fix it, you will. And oftentimes we look at developmental life stages. So because hormones can play a big role in anxiety. So as kids are evolving and growing, like, sometimes they might have a really anxious moment, and then developmentally their hormones change a little bit and they're like, get some confidence in their stride and they do well. And then they're like, oh, wow, like, I might not need medication anymore. All my strategies are often like really working and I don't even need to use them anymore. You know, there's just a shift in brain chemistry, and it can kind of decrease the anxiety as well.
Okay, thanks. I think that's my last question.
Awesome.
So I'll just pause to see if anybody has any last questions or comments. Nope. Okay. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. If you have not had a chance to watch Angst yet, the link is live through tomorrow, July 22nd. It is free. It is not available on streaming services. So if you haven't watched it yet, I really encourage you to watch it. It's a great film. It's a great conversation starter with your family Oh, good. We have a question.
I know, Susan, you just said that it's not available. Are either of you familiar with, is there any ways if somebody or some organization, schools, parent organizations, whatever else are looking to get access to this film, how would one go about that? Or is that another question for another day?
No, that's a great question. So it's through iNDIEFLIX, and I can connect whoever to the contacts at iNDIEFLIX. So generally how it works is an organization purchases, some sort of package. So this time we tried it virtually. A couple years ago, 3 years ago, we had it at the Bird Theater in person, and some other places. Like there was a showing in Roanoke, a showing in Virginia Beach. And so this time we just thought we'd try it a little bit differently. So there's different ways to do it. So a school could purchase it, or a county, or
School system.
another organization.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool.
I really would encourage it. It's good. It is kind of rated for 10 and over, students 10 and over. And I really would encourage, if you have your kids, they haven't watched it with you, I would encourage them to do so, because it really, even if they're not dealing with anxiety, it would kind of put in their brain, hey, this is something that could happen. Or if I'm feeling this way, maybe we need to talk about it. And, watching a video is a great conversation starter for larger discussions with parents all the time. So it'd just be a good way to kind of put it out there. They might look or act really bored, but we're planting the seed, right? Like, they might not have questions right away, or they might not make comments right away, but we're planting the seed that, hey, if this happens, like, I know mom knows about this, or dad knows about this, and we can go and like have a conversation with them down the road.
Yeah. That's definitely, I really felt like, there was a couple of things I liked about it altogether, but one was I felt like it was a really nice balance of kind of helping to define the difference between, quote unquote, normal anxiety and clinical anxiety. And then going on to just, give people a window into, several different young adults' experience of it, sort of, hey, maybe I can see myself in some of these situations. And then, like you talked about numerous times, then going ahead and giving some good concrete strategies for dealing with it, not that replaces maybe working with somebody on it. But again, just a nice balance of kind of defining the issue, letting you see into some people's experience of that issue, and then giving some strategies for coping with it. Just a really good introduction for either a parent group or a student group, either one.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think having those teen and young adults speak about their own experiences is so impactful for other teens. I think, as adults, we can talk about it till we're blue in the face sometimes, but hearing it from a peer is just very impactful.
When it's hopeful. I mean, these kids, they didn't come on and say, I'm anxious and it's never getting better. They said, I'm anxious, and this is all the things that I did to make it work, and I managed it, and now I have a sense of positivity to the point I'm sharing it with the world. And like, when kids come into my office, oftentimes they're in crisis and they're sitting with so much anxiety, and then hopelessness is ever going to get any better. So having like a visual depiction of like, I was where you were, and you will get better just like I did. Like that's like really empowering, and then would make them want to do the work.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Skip. We hope that you leave this evening with a few more tools in your toolbox for supporting the teen in your life. Look for an email in the coming days with a link to the recording of this event this evening, and it will also be available on ckgconnections.com within a day or two. So thank you to Ashley Morgan Soukup for sharing your expertise and insight with us tonight, and to Haley Dalton for managing our Q&A and chat. Our next conversation with CKG is Brandon Geyer on August 12th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Brandon is a UVA graduate and former Tampa Bay Ray and Cleveland Indian who will speak about mindfulness and mental health for teens in sports and in life. So that will be a great one for the teens in your life to attend. Thank you again, and I hope everybody has a great evening.
Thank you.